with the questions we had about the creative process before, which is, do you think that at any given moment, like whenever we're doing something, there are always ideas going through our mind? Or do you think that that there's a time for ideas? So is the task of the creative, is it to wait for their time? Or is it more like a mental thing where you can say, okay, now I'm ready to receive and the ideas will be there?
I think oftentimes you have to trigger ideas, and you have to find ways or games to trigger those ideas, because usually you're creating most of the time on a deadline, and usually you have certain amount of time and you have to trigger those ideas, and whatever is around that. Sometimes you're listening to something, sometimes you're just like with some ideas, something you're working on your instrument, something you're hearing, something you like and you want to emulate, and that's what comes out in in my experience.
Do you tend to have too many ideas, or is it like when you have an idea, this is a good one? Is that like a special moment?
Well, sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it's a moment where I play something and then I feel, okay, this is the idea. But oftentimes it depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm not on a very good day, and there's always a moment where you say, like, everything sounds very bad. Nothing is good enough, And at some point, there's always, I'm in that moment right now. There's a time lapse, and we did that deadline. You have this amount of time when I allowed myself to play and be creative, and this amount of time, the last 20%, 30%, when I say, okay, that's it. This is where it is, and I have to create something within this time frame, and then after that, I would check if I need to rewrite something or something.
Will ideas often come when you're not at an instrument? Or is it like, do the ideas tend to come from playing?
No, not only playing. Sometimes I hear something. Sometimes I just sing in something in my head. Sometimes, usually, my process is like, I like to transcribe things a lot. Things I like to hear, and then I like to play them on the piano. That's it. And after a while, those things are coming through my compositions. I'm not looking for it. It's like transcribing in a slow motion. This is my process. Or sometimes I just do, I like that, and I will incorporate that into my compositions.
If you do get at something when you're not at an instrument, how do you capture that moment of inspiration?
Voice recording, voice memo. Usually it's walking or doing something else, and I say, oh, that's a good idea. And then I do a voice memo. And I think many people are doing that. And it's funny because when you listen back, in another context, it doesn't sound great. It's just because you're seeing the bruto of that idea. But in your head, you're imagining the result in a way, but what you can really hear or see as bruto is not great. There's something that you can see beyond that.
What do you think about this idea that the first take is usually best? This idea that there's something when the original idea is still most like fresh, that there's something to that quality?
I think if you're connected enough, that might apply. If you're sometimes a first take might be interrupted or by even you're nervous or you're thinking too much. And if you're in the right mood, sometimes I like to do in the mornings, I improvise, and I like to start creating something from the scratch. But because I know my focus is like there's no phone, nothing else. And usually I take a lot of ideas from this kind of moments, because The ideas, they come organically, they connect organically, and sometimes I see, like, when I hear back, and I think, oh, what was that actually? That was actually pretty good. And you can create something that is logic and it has a curve and anything, but it is improvised and it's also real time composing.
Can you tell me just a little bit about your current release and how that went from the origin, like the very first ideas and impulses, to the finished record?
Well, that was actually a thing about a deadline. I did have a concert with a band and the drummer couldn't make it. And at some point I say, look, I had this idea about playing without drums. I love albums without drums. And then I say, okay, I'm going to do it. I have 2 months to write. I have the time and I have the people. So I call new people and I say, I'm going to play around. And I was listening at some point, some other music that I was like more Nordic music or, just kind of like ambient. And there was a lot of idea from synthesizers and space and everything. And I started to write some things down. And at some point I had a few tunes, and then I had the deadline for the recording, and then I say, okay, I don't have enough. I do have to write more. And then it was great because I do have my book over there. I write all my ideas there. And then I say, what I have, what do I need? Okay, I need something like that because I don't have enough to get a balance, right? And without that, I'm just like all over the place.